I think it's more how do we kind of unify our strategy, right, across the world. So if we can measure and scale these capabilities, then we can unify that strategy to grow the business globally. Because if we have global growth goals that I support, my business stakeholders have global growth goals for digital commerce. And, we need to enable that growth. And so there are key levers that we support globally to drive that growth. And therefore the programs are focused around that.
Wow, that's amazing. Because what I heard there was you feel not just the sympathetic feel for, colleagues in charge of growth, but you actually internalize some of the responsibility for that growth. You're not just there to show them the insights and the way, and this is what the data says, do with it what you will, but it's actually one step further. Welcome back to Generation Influence, a podcast focusing on the brand marketers working behind the scenes, driving change and innovation in e-commerce and influencer marketing. I'm your host, Bill Hildebolt, one of the co-founders of gen.video, a leading platform in the influencer marketing space that's particularly focused on driving e-commerce outcomes and advanced analytics. Speaking of e-commerce and advanced analytics, today's guest is Celia Van Wickel, who is the Global Director and Head of Omnichannel Analytics at Mars, which is a fancy way of saying she builds strategy around doing a whole lot of really advanced analytics around e-commerce and omnichannel retailer. Now, some of you know I'm a bit of a math geek, which is not to be confused with somebody who's really good at math. I just like math and what it can do. And so I got to say, this is the podcast I've been waiting for. So welcome, Celia. Tell us a bit about your career path and how one ends up as the global head of omnichannel analytics. Feels like a job I might like to have someday.
Hi, Bill. Nice to meet you and be here on this podcast. You're not the only one who might be a math geek. I think math was also a big pillar of my career as well. Definitely was my strongest subject when I was growing up. So you're not the only math geek out there. But in terms of my path, right now I'm in an advanced analytics role supporting omnichannel e-commerce. But I like to think of my background and career kind of as, yes, I started my career in insights and analytics kind of as this core foundation and complement to my career development. But it's definitely more that omnichannel e-commerce side, I think, that has led me to where I'm at today to be in this global analytics role. In my career, I've been, leading in the omnichannel and e-commerce space, supporting insights and analytics for leading companies such as Walmart, Lowe's Home Improvement, Mattel Toys, Coca-Cola, and now, I'm here at Mars in a similar level role. Most of my background is supporting digital leaders and cross-functional partners really to provide those insights and analytics and drive action and collaboration for their business. Prior to joining Mars, I had the luxury of being Kantar's digital commerce thought leader and expert in their retail insights consulting division. And that really gave me great exposure to think about trends going on in the industry, such as, rapid delivery, retail media, digital shelf, and Amazon strategy. When I was at Coca-Cola, I really was leading more dedicated e-commerce insights and analytics and influencing our e-commerce strategies with both retailers and internally for our own digital development. And this is really what's guided me into where I'm at today. At Coca-Cola, I had my first data lake project that I consulted on because I was the heaviest user of some of the data to drive insights for the organization. So I think that's kind of some of the building blocks that's led me to where I am today.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's so many things that I want to unpack there, and the way you've kind of moved from, let's call it the manufacturing or, traditional brand side of things, back and forth to retail, obviously spending time at a firm like Kantar, where you would really, really deepen this. And then even I love that last anecdote where you're talking about okay, you're the one who's diving into all of this stuff. Okay, go formally build us a data lake. And so that's something that I think would give most people the heebie-jeebies, but I just envision you, getting that assignment and being like, okay, where do I start? This is going to be great. I can't wait to dive into this. And so, I think one of the themes I hope we can talk a lot about in the podcast is this kind of heterogeneity of data that's out there, right? Data coming from different sources, and then how does that get integrated, together, into insights. And of course, at this point, you're not so much running the numbers; you're at the level of your career where you're doing the strategy. But I think it's an even important, even at that strategic level, thinking through those things. You are the person like who's going to think through and help your organizations understand and and translate the reality, which we quantify with numbers, into the numbers themselves. So this is awesome. Let's go back to the beginning. Your career, definitely, as you said, all about consumer insights and analytics. I am sort of curious. You got your bachelor's degree at Emerson, which is like right here near where I am in Boston. It's this amazing, I'm going to say it's maybe like slightly little hidden gem school here, but if you know it and you know Boston colleges, like it really stands out for being this incredible marketing and creative school. And then you took your degree there. You got a master's right away in marketing analysis, and it sounds like, based on you were saying, like what you were good at, even back to high school and elementary school, was that, this is what I love and I'm good at, or was this like, okay, if I go to Emerson and I'm in marketing, this is the part, this is where marketing is going and I need to go that way. Was it personal preference, or did you see marketing going down this heavy analytical path?
I think it was me trying to be both creative and quantitative at the same time, kind of merging together. I did go to Emerson College, which is mostly a creative arts and marketing college. A lot of people go there for theater as well. It's very big for that. I actually did theater in high school, but not at Emerson. So it's actually, it is kind of a funny story. So I actually did identify back in high school that I wanted to be in some kind of marketing or advertising type role in my career. And while I would say I'm exactly in that today, I think it's continued to morph into essence or support of those type of roles in my career. So in high school, I actually took an advertising and art class. So I used to be artistic in high school, and I really enjoyed it. And so I pursued schools where I would get a marketing degree. At Emerson, I got an integrated marketing degree, so that I touched marketing, PR, and other types of communication support. And so I actually really in my career, I was like, oh, I'm going to be like, a creative ad executive, and I'm going to go that path. But as I did internships and took coursework, I actually noticed the one topic I did best and was media buying and planning. It's kind of quantitative in nature. And I actually started my career after college and that. But then I think more and more that data side kept calling at me, where I transitioned that into a media research role. So I noticed that I had to complement more to serve on the data and insight strategy than to be on like what was more to me the sales side of the organization. And so that, I've been doing that ever since. And so I started my career more in insights and built that. When I was at cars.com, that's when I was in a heavy insights role leading a team. And I said, I really want to do insights for my career. And I was supporting marketing teams and product development teams. So I was doing brand tracking, ad testing, all that stuff that marketing people do. But I knew it was that insight side. So I decided to get my degree in marketing analysis, which was similar to an MBA, but really dedicated into the marketing research and quantitative analytics type roles that are available. So that's where I thought I would go with my career. And I'm kind of in that today, but in a very much different capacity with omnichannel and digital commerce kind of strategy for analytics. So I still have that numeric side of my background, but I've kind of grown that to touch kind of more of the core retail e-commerce world. But I still touch marketing. So I deal with people building digital capabilities and maximizing our sales with paid on-site media assets. Retail media is a big topic right now. And I have to touch those topics and understand how it impacts sales performance in the e-commerce and omnichannel space. So these are things that while I may not be supporting a day-to-day marketing role, marketing has led to my career, has guided my path, and this quantitative side has gotten to me where I am today.
Let's make a note. We definitely have to come back and talk a little bit about the revolution that is retail media. And so I feel like your career has in many ways, for what you do, for sure, has been perfectly timed and tuned to some of these like major revolutions that, you probably had some instinct for or sense of, even back to Emerson, but like I'm sure would say like you couldn't have predicted how fast and how far some of these things have gone. And by the way, I also love the story, and again, this is one of those things where I think a school like Emerson can be so valuable because my as you know, maybe the audience doesn't, my co-founder also went to Emerson, and when she got there, she thought she was going to be like a TV personality, and I think so people are drawn to that creativity, the elements of the school, which all the way through theater, but like everything backwards to kind of the communications and marketing creative spaces, and she ended up obviously as a digital media executive, and like I'd argue very successfully. And so it's kind of fascinating that if you dive in early to these things that have career implications, even in school, I think it really does kind of supercharge the path and finding that thing that you're really good at, which is awesome. Talk about being early in e-commerce, right? So again, if I'm translating correctly, and you can take me, disabuse me of this if it's not quite right, but you become this expert in marketing analysis. And again, back in the day, that really meant like, to my mind, I hear analyzing how TV commercial performs, analyzing how, other type of advertising things perform, and, and trying to quantify the performance of these, marketing expenditures. But pretty quickly you got pulled into the e-commerce side of things. And so even if you were trying to analyze the marketing efforts of a cars.com or, Walmart when you were there, I would imagine you were also getting pulled deeply into some of the pure e-commerce analytics, which would have been very nascent. And like, what was that like? What was that transition like? Were you like a kid in a candy store? Like there's almost like, we go from, it's hard to measure marketing ROI, right? 50% is wasted. We're just not sure which 50%, to like, oh my God, now there's so much data. We don't even know what data is important. Like, what are some of the big insights you remember from that phase of your career?
Yeah. So I think the e-commerce function of it has always like just kind of been this part of everything and every role I've taken, whether I sought it out or it was circumstantial to what I was doing. So once I left like the media buying world, I did media research that was TV focused. But then when I got deeper into insights, one of my first insights related roles was online ad effectiveness. So really the growth of digital marketing and measuring that. So that was like the first tip of that. And that's how old I am now. So getting into online ad effectiveness and just seeing the digital marketing evolution. And then when I did transition to a .com, a cars.com, right? It's all about the .com and what you do to enable commerce in an online space. And so while it wasn't a financial commerce site, it is a site for buyers and sellers of vehicles to come together. Mobile apps, iPhone was new. I was doing insights and research supportive of how do we build the right ways that people shop on a mobile app and device, publishing papers in that space, and supporting those digital marketing efforts like keyword searches would come up in that role, end-to-end web development. So again, it wasn't really going to cars.com to necessarily say I'm going to be a .com person or e-commerce person. I was there to help support insights, but was touching all these leading edge topics in the digital space. At Walmart, I was there many years ago. Online grocery didn't exist, but I was on toys and electronics categories. And in being in those toys and electronics categories, I was touching the essence of online buying for the first time. So online price matching was a topic that I had to pursue. I had to pursue, should we digitize the toy catalog online?
Wow.
And before there was even online grocery for Walmart, right? All these topics, because online was growing in growth. And I think those nuggets along the way, as things went from multi-channel to omnichannel, which was a big thing at Lowe's, looking at how we create personalized, relevant engagement. How do we look at the strategy that Amazon is creating in our space? They were growing, to working solely at Coca-Cola, dedicated to the whole entire North America e-commerce team and guiding our strategies with retailers and internally as well. So it's just kind of been this thing that's kind of just morphed and really kind of incubated my career. And I've gotten a passion for it where I actually study it and like to kind of understand where the trends are going and why they're happening, which is what led me to Kantar as a digital commerce expert. So I have, in the past really dedicated to learning the space, speaking about the e-commerce industry and guiding that business knowledge, because I think in driving anything in data, I'm not a data scientist. I've never been a data scientist. You mentioned the data lake earlier. I didn't build the data lake. I helped support the data that went into the data lake. And that's because of the business knowledge that I'm able to obtain throughout my supportive roles that I've had, more so than the actual data itself.
Yeah. And again, I want to highlight, like, to me, and this is just a personal opinion, the role you play figuring out what is the data that should go into a data lake, how do we have to interpret that data, what is truly the meaning of it, is the hard part. Now, I guess, again, that doesn't mean that I feel like I could go code a data lake myself. That's not what I'm saying, because I definitely could not. But I think understanding the qualitative attributes of quantitative data and how it has to be used is the magic. And it's why I'm so excited to talk to you. Which then kind of leads me to, my next question, and again, I know we're delving a little bit into the past and the history here, but I think this stuff is fascinating. And, if any viewers listening, I don't want to hear about that. Like, tell me about Mars. We'll get there. I promise we will get there. But, to me, if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. And you got nothing on me in terms of like being old. Like, I'm old, you're not. And so, but you were experiencing these times where, like, you talked about, e-commerce through the iPhone. And I mean, there was like a decade, at least it felt like a decade, where, we could see it coming, we could feel it coming, but there were not physical, but, software limitations and infrastructure limitations to shopping on a phone, where there were times where we would despair, is it ever really going to happen? And then, of course, it did. And so I'm sort of curious, as you went through that, how much did you feel like you knew, hey, I can see the data, I can see the insights, and I can see what the blockers are? Did you feel like you could predict the future? Or did you feel like, I don't know, like the dominoes are going to have to fall. I don't know when they fall. And I don't know if all the data ever comes together. Or were you just like every day, like, I hope today's the day when it all snaps together because I can see how it's going to happen?
I don't think it was always purposeful in that way. I think now I maybe make some more of those assumptions than I used to. Again, I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't ever guarantee the future by any means. But you can see signals, right, along the way. So, right, it was very clear, right, when you have a mobile device, like when I was at cars.com, right, it's in your pocket, right? It's on the go with you. So that's different than when you're sitting at home, right? So it probably wasn't going to be used to be as in-depth of a tool because you're kind of more on the go, right? There's signs like that. Like when does using my phone come into play when I'm looking for a vehicle to sell? Right? It doesn't come into play when I'm at the dealership itself, right? So, and do I have that role? So there's things like that you have to consider, right? With those trends and those behaviors, right? It morphed because technology morphed, where you could probably use it for more dedicated research if you chose to today. But I think it's just those signals that you see along the way. Even the online shopping, like you could see the evolution of the benefit that online shopping at Walmart was providing to those core categories, especially like electronics, where it was a very heavy research category. So again, a lot of it started in like research heavy categories, and that's where I was working on.
Yeah.
And that's why you'll see the most mature categories online are definitely ones where it takes a little bit more of a higher consideration purchase. But then I've been able to morph that into lower consideration categories where I'm at now with, being in the food and beverage space at Coca-Cola and now at Mars, where we're doing the confectionery side of the business, the candy side, and, trying to drive that challenge in a digital world and online shopping world where the store still predominantly really matters. And the online experience is still there. It drives volume, it drives growth, but it plays a different role.
And let's actually do a brief interlude there about Coca-Cola. So when you were there, right, I can imagine that was when e-commerce for soda was like really like nascent. And so did you almost feel like, again, what an amazing company. This has nothing to do with Coke. What a opportunity to work at a iconic brand and company, a great company. But did you feel like, wow, like, am I here too early to do some of this stuff? Or was it like, no, this is amazing. Like, we're being able to set the foundation off the backs of the way other industries have evolved? Like, what was more of the sense there? And what were you trying to accomplish? And maybe even if it makes sense, and again, if it doesn't, skip it, like, what was the kind of data that you were recommending go into the data lake?
Yes, it was 2018 when I started at Coca-Cola. And then, right, even less so than today. Yes, it was about maybe 2% of sales. I don't know. I can't remember the exact number, but I'm just estimating here. But it was really low. Like food and beverage back in 2018 was very low. Online grocery was just really getting its momentum started. This is pre-pandemic. I think pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. We were constantly getting questions on incremental value of the online space, and me really trying to teach the organization about, I think, really what is really an omni view of the business, because I think people were kind of always thinking about it, and and still today still happens where it's considered maybe a separate channel or a separate source of opportunity. So if this thing is smaller than the local, like, regional store where we barely have a sales team supporting it, why would I care about it, right?
Yep.
You start to see those growth trends. You start to see, because I was also in insights function, so I was also looking at the shopper very deeply. Who is the shopper? How are they the same? How are they different? You would start to see trends that these were actually like your heaviest, largest spending shoppers.
Ooh, right.
You would see that they would be adding a trip with e-commerce, right? It wasn't maybe their predominant channel that they were shopping, but you would get another trip, another sale with them with e-commerce. And so it's those kind of connections that I was making to go in there. So when it came time to do like the data lake consulting that I was doing, it was more, how do we automate and digitize some of the data sources that we're using to give like performance reviews to the business. And where my expertise came in is more, how do we connect that data to key levers of the business? So mapping the different e-commerce modalities. So what we call modalities are, is it driven by online pickup? Is it online delivery to home? Is it the store? Those are kind of factors in what are those variables, we like to say, matter to assess that information, and how do we map that within the data is where I kind of gave some consult. The reason is because in a consumer goods business, each of those levers are treated differently in terms of how we serve with the customer to get to the sale from the consumer. So you have to look at those different areas differently. So that was more of the consult that I drove, was to understand how do we activate, map, and maximize the data in a way that streamlines our reporting and gives value to the business.
That is such a great story. And I want to confess something, which I hope will even maybe underline for the audience, like what a powerful anecdote that is. Because for years, I would talk to clients, particularly obviously my CPG clients, who would say, well, it's only 2% of my sales. What difference does it make? And be like, yeah, but it's the only 2% that's growing. It's growing really fast. And so what I take away from that is that this is where market share is shifting. And these are where the vulnerable customers are. And if you can go grab them as they come into this channel, you can potentially shift share for life as you get them. I was really thinking, I guess the confession on my part is I was like really thinking of them as, in my mind, they were new customers. They were the emerging customers, the point of market entry type customers. That's what I saw shifting. What you just said was somewhere between an expansion and a refutation of the point. And you were the expert, so we know who was wrong in this little story, where no, it's the power users that were shifting their behavior, and we needed to be there. So it wasn't about conquesting new consumers. It was probably actually the much more important side of things, which is retain the customers as their behavior changes. And again, a couple other podcast users have said, meet the customer where they are, which made all the sense to me in the world. But I think I now see it 2 levels deeper hearing you tell that anecdote, like that is incredibly powerful. So I don't know if there's anything you'd want to riff off of that, but like that was one of those, oh yeah, this is why I do the podcast, so I learn from smart people moments.
Yeah, I mean, people say follow the consumer, but people like to follow the dollars, right? So that was really the translation back for the business. It's like, I'm never going to say it's lots and lots of dollars compared to your core store business or other areas where we get revenue from. It's just not. But it has a core value of your consumer. And yes, it's all about an incremental dollar into the basket. So that was kind of the ways that we kind of position that OmniView, is to think about that incremental value in a way that is truly not, because it's like I'm getting all new customers coming in, though the pandemic did get some people new, but it is more about that extra dollar I can sell.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. One more digression before we get to Mars head on. And that's the Kantar time. And, actually I've been more on whatever we would call the agency consultant vendor tech provider side of the world, where you spend most of your time, very much on the brand and, and true deliver of core value, right? Hopefully with some assistance from people like me. So Kantar was your like moment kind of on the other side for a hot second there. And I'm just sort of curious, were you like, this was like the fastest learning time of all because you could go up to 50,000 feet and you could see everything and you could hear the stories that were coming in from different industries as you like worked with your compatriots and you learned the models that they were using and frameworks that they, I'm sure, were, coming up with to help think through these things? Or was it just so challenging for you to not be embedded in the business, like, where you knew you could add even deeper value than you need the Kantars and hopefully the gen.videos like to get to where you want to go. But what was that like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually highly enjoyed my time at Kantar. I love, because I like seeking out industry trends. I think it went from a passion to my full-time job, right? So sometimes there's a balance of passion to full-time job in that. So again, I would be looking, right, as an external, looking at third-party sources, syndicated sources, and then using my own background, right, to create frameworks and how that matters to the CPG and other major brands that are clients of Kantar. So some of that was, keeping a pulse of what Amazon's doing, how is retail media evolving, how do you maximize the digital shelf, and also consulting back to key clients of ours, some major brands that we supported, and some customer requests that they had to guide them on their digital commerce space and consulting. Again, I didn't say, okay, immediately I need to go back into the brand side business. But what happened was, I wasn't actually actively looking, but I was starting to realize that I can continue to read, to digest, to create frameworks. But then eventually, I also need to be learning from being in the business, because that's where the action is actually happening. And so if I want to continue to stay an expert in this space, even though now I'm moved into an internal company versus a more agency company where I was able to evangelize the trends, I may not ever know fully, again, how things are going without, a third party reporting on it for me or having to go talk to a brand now about what they're doing. So it was kind of that divide back saying, well, I know so much about e-commerce. Yes, I read a lot, which is helpful for this current role. But it was also that balance of knowing, well, I learned a lot what I know from e-commerce by having been at Coca-Cola, at Walmart, etc.
So it makes all the sense in the world. I totally feel that. I have a personal, somewhat parallel story, which I actually, I was a banker for a long time, and it was early in my career, and then I, and so the job was like giving advice to clients and about what they should do. And I always sort of felt like, gosh, my advice feels so surface level because I'm not in the action, day to day with you in the trenches. What I failed to realize as a, relatively junior person was, the value of the advice you can give at that top level. And from, being able to see the forest, so to speak. And so, but I was like so intrigued to get into the dirt and the nitty and the gritty that's what like pulled me out. And so it's funny because both sides need each other, and it's great you've been able to kind of travel on both. So, all right, well, with no further ado, let's talk about Mars. I feel like this is a role that, again, as I've gotten to know you, really is the culmination of the things you've done. And again, I'll say it this way: being at a Mars, a company that probably my perception would be still really important sales channel through the brick and mortar, that's probably never going to go away, or at least not in the foreseeable future. So you really are trying to do multi-channel marketing. You're trying to understand like all these different levelers. In many cases, you're going to be indirect. Obviously, the role of marketing, and meeting the customer where they are, super critical. Like, so it's got to be a very fun job, not just because it's a fun product, but because of, to me, all these like structural challenges that make it interesting and complex. And so tell us about, tell us more about what you're doing there, what the role is, and like what you're focused on, like initiative wise.
Yeah. So at Mars, or deeply, right, I am helping build product strategy, basically, I would say, for the business to enable advanced analytics tools for our sales teams, for our digital capabilities teams on Mars, and the Mars Wrigley snacking side, the confectionery side, it's what we like to call it. And so what that means, right, there's technical side that happens to build advanced analytics, and I work with those sides in a peer group at Mars, and our one-demand data and analytics team that we have. But mine is to work with the core business and truly bringing out the digital commerce and the omni side of the business as we work on any account. So and it's global. So I have people from around the world that I'm working with, from people, our global emerging markets, China, Europe, as well as North America, particularly the US. And so I'm having to look at how do we strategize not only with the Amazon team or the people supporting like an Instacart or Uber Eats or Deliveroo, which is part of what we do, not only how we're looking at the digital shelf, which we call Perfect Digital Store at Mars, and how do we strategize and build capabilities that help them understand the impact of digital shelf KPIs and measurement to create the right actions and drive the right sales performance for our business. But then I also am working with, our traditional, what we call bricks and clicks or brick and mortar retailers. So there's Walmart, Tesco's, et cetera, of the world. And our role is to try to drive end-to-end sales enablement for them, but truly think about the omni piece. So I like to say, am I omnifying them? So how do I bring in analytics, right, with fancy models, tools, data coming together? So we like to integrate data, connect that data, and apply models on top of that to make it more actionable for the business. So again, how am I enabling them? How am I helping you understand how the online and offline can connect together to drive whether it's sell-in, their operational side of their business, and joint business planning strategies with the customers, right? So we want it to be internal in how they manage the business and also external in how they talk to the customers. So again, it is truly taking our data, and this data includes what we call second-party data, first-party data a little bit, as well as other data, internal financial data sources, to really bring out together the full picture of different business use cases that enable us to drive insight and action for the business and help them save time and drive value.
All right, I love it. Many things in there to unpack, which I'll try to do this in like short little bursts. First one that popped up for sure was, okay, you're doing this in different markets, across the world. And I'm sort of curious if you find there is more commonality as you go from these very different markets, forget just like United States to Europe, which is different enough, but like United States to China, like couldn't be more different, or, Asia generally, right? Do you find yourself having to unlearn or try to forget momentarily the lessons from North America when you're looking at these other markets? Or are there commonalities where you're like, well, this is happening in the States, and therefore, even if it's not now, in a year, I know it's going to happen in Europe? Like, what is it? Are they just completely diverse markets, or is there more repurposable learnings there?
Yeah. So our perspective is that things that we build should be scalable to across the markets across the world. So that means there has to be consistency in how it serves the business. So more actually answer is that there's probably more the same than what's different. Now there are clear differences. Like China is definitely a very different way that you would engage the consumer and sell to the consumer in that ecosystem. But when you're thinking about sales enablement type of measures or how I show up digitally, there are some core frameworks and principles that we need to drive for the business to enable our growth of our brands and our categories. And so, for example, we actually will build capabilities, but we're focused on how we build these capabilities into core programs that go across the world. So I mentioned Perfect Digital Store, which is our digital shelf capabilities. We want to globalize that because if you globalize it, then you could actually read consistently how things are benchmarked to each other around the world. Otherwise, you have one data source saying one thing in this market, another data source saying something else. So if we bring that data together and see holistically, you actually can look at the health of the total business worldwide. So that's one of the things that we do. Media activation, right? Well, some markets might be more mature than others. We probably will build those and scale those for more mature markets. So, you and I mentioned about online paid media, AKA retail media. So some of the solutions that we're building, we built in Europe. We're optimizing and building those in the US. We will bring those parts of those frameworks to other markets that may not be as mature, or those markets will learn from those tools and those capabilities as they get more mature and need those capabilities. So those are some of the ways that we look at that. End-to-end sales enablement. I mean, no salesperson will say, I don't want to look at my P&L. I don't want to look at my retailer's P&L. I don't want to know who my customer shoppers are. Right? So these are the things, I need to know how to drive our brand and portfolio. Right? So these are the questions that sales teams have, and the sales teams want to know how it's going to drive incremental dollars and value for their business so they can strategize their selling appropriately and manage the cost of the business. So those are universal global needs. The data and maybe the insight that comes out of them might be very market specific because how that operationally it works in that market might be different. But the idea of the programs and the scalability is that we're helping solve these major issues across the globe.
Right. And so if I restate that, basically by having scalable tools, scalable frameworks, maybe even scalable hypotheses, feeding in as consistent a data as possible, we can see the differences, and therefore we can tactically shift market by market to react. Is that a fair summary of that?
I think it's more how do we kind of unify our strategy, right, across the world. So if we can measure and scale these capabilities, then we can unify that strategy to grow the business globally. Because if we have global growth goals that I support, my business stakeholders have global growth goals for digital commerce. And, we need to enable that growth. And so there are key levers that we support globally to drive that growth. And therefore the programs are focused around that.
Wow, that's amazing. Because what I heard there was you feel not just the sympathetic feel for, colleagues in charge of growth, but you actually internalize some of the responsibility for that growth. You're not just there to show them the insights and the way, and this is what the data says, do with it what you will, but it's actually one step further. It's not just the learning. It is like, okay, and this is how I think, and again, maybe they ultimately have authority of what tactics, levers they pull to try to grow, but that you are fully engaged in that war, right?
Yeah. So, we're really looking to kind of build in-house, right, the best capabilities possible that really unifies our business as well as helps us to continue to see the full 360 of the business that's out there, right? The retailer's business and the Mars business and the consumer business coming together within the data that we integrate for that. And again, my role is not to figure out how the analytics part comes to life or how the tool is built. My role is to help understand the business strategy and the business needs that will build the capabilities and inform the capabilities and tools that will enable them. We are an enabler into digitizing our workforce. We want them to be an end user, an owner of the tools that we create for them to be able to use in their day-to-day roles. And we actually ask that they embed them in their core objectives to embrace these solutions in their jobs.
Here's my seriously fun question for this week. And again, it really kind of almost comes back to the beginning of the conversation, because I'm always interested in origin stories, but I was so interested in your origin story because I feel like you found your calling. And I think that's amazing when you find people, right? There's chasing your dreams, which we talk a lot about. I think we talk less about finding your calling. And I think you are a person who found your calling and have followed that calling to great impact. And so I love that. And I would love to impart to people, younger people, even my own kids, like how one does that. And so let's take it this way. If I'm an associate brand manager and my career development plan says I need to up my game on marketing analytics side of things, like other than begging you to, be my mentor, which would be my plan A personally, what are the resources that you would guide them toward, or what would the advice be that you would give them to say, like, here's the path to how you can become great at this, even if you weren't a math major?
Being great at it is, to me, some of it you learn, but some of it is my sense of curiosity. And I would encourage a sense of curiosity from others in their role. So a lot of what I've been learning or taking into my role, yes, I absorb what I work day to day on as an insight into how I kind of think about e-commerce or analytics in my career. But I actually just read a lot. So even before I joined Kantar, I started, especially a few years ago, just started reading tons of industry news about what's going on in the space. I mean, I was, reading about ChatGPT like right before November, like generative AI. Like there's things that you start to see patterns and trends of if you read it more deeply. So if you're interested in marketing analytics, I think it's first understanding what kind of data comes out of the marketing and the marketing initiatives that are needed. And then what kind of questions do you think need to be answered out of the marketing, or what are barriers of putting the data together to get to a business outcome that you need? What can you read about that? What can you enable that with? The analytics is kind of the math, we talked about math earlier, behind it that will bring it to life. But it all comes down to, what am I trying to solve and need? How can I learn about generative AI? Maybe not a deep modeling view, but maybe enough to understand the outcomes that it could have on my business and what way it will impact me. How do you prepare yourself to know that, hey, if a language model I create copy for a living and ChatGPT is going to create it for me, well, then your role might be more strategy of what kind of tonality, brand essence I'm going to need from that copy versus the copy itself. You might be just cross-checking that information, or your role might evolve to helping create the right solutions for those. So I think it's important to read those things. It's marketing and it's analytics trends. Right now, even on the marketing side, I mean, we talk about retail media, traditional media, trade media, like all media is converging right now towards performance, towards conversion. There's multiple people who need to understand that information for different reasons, right? The traditional media teams are going to still want to understand, how do I allocate my dollars across all the media solutions and where? But then you have sales teams now saying, okay, well, you're saying it's driving conversion, so how is it impacting me, my retailer, and what flows through my retailer, right? So you're getting different people wanting to know and wanting to see how this impacts. And it's all the same measurement. It's all about, how do I drive sales? But where those sales are enabled are different across the board.
Well, so for all my employees and all the people I mentor who are now watching this podcast, I want to promise you this was not a plant. I did not know what Celia was going to say. I might have dreamed and prayed that she would say curiosity. I felt like I already won at that point, because that is how I advise everybody. You just want to be curious and you want to dive into it. The fact that you followed it up with read a lot was like the cherry on the top of the cake, because it wasn't like be curious and just do a bunch of numbers, because the numbers always have to have the context, and the context comes from the reading and being aware of the environment, so that you're constantly moving back and forth between, I have this observation and then I tie it to a hypothesis. And if you are doing those two things well and you're curious on both sides, to me, that's where the true insights come from. That's where the true, and again, it's where math geeks like us, I feel like, can, when we're good and on our game, we can look like visionaries. Like these ideas just popped into our head. It was like, no, I was looking at the data, I was understanding the environment we were at, and I could see what the sort of inevitable outcome was going to be. Because, a lot of, again, not the trends continue forever, but that once you see a trend kind of getting going, usually they get a little bit of momentum on their own. And so, no, that was awesome. Thank you for now something that I can share with my mentees and say, like, listen to her. Don't believe me, believe her.
I'm a big picture thinker, and I just, like, maybe again, that creativity that I tried to do back at Emerson, I don't know, but it's just kind of that part of me, and then balanced with the numbers part. So, yeah.
And I think the thing is, not everybody, look, a lot of people are intimidated by numbers and math. Maybe it's not true, Celia. Like, I think she does a lot of really advanced analytics that probably I couldn't even understand what she was talking about. A lot of the math that I do at the end of the day, actually, let me say it this way. I get a lot of insights out of doing some very simple addition, subtraction, division type math. This number that is clearly related to that number, I haven't seen anybody divide the two. Let me look at that. Let me think of that as a percentage of that or a ratio of that. And there's insights there. And it's not regression analysis. And oh, by the way, regression analysis isn't hard with the right software, but you don't have to go there 9 times out of 10.
And you don't even need to know what regression analysis is. You just need to know that you're trying to find the biggest drivers and inputs to that core thing that you're trying to identify is driving it. So it could be sales, for example, right? What is driving my sales, right? Again, we do more than just regression analysis on our side. There's more advanced models than that. But, it's understanding what the outcome of that model will do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been amazing. I've had so much fun, and I have learned a ton, and I've got some takeaways, which I love. So, Celia, thank you very much for being on the show this week. I hope the audience got 1/10 out of this, what I did. And we likewise very much appreciate the audience for tuning in and listening and sharing some of your day with us. So thanks to all of you as well. We will see you next time on Generation Influence. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Generation Influence drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check us out and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can find information on next week's guest in the description below. Hope to see you then and there.